But before we start, you should and you must have an idea about what is a constitution. If we have to study Indian constitution for polity, what exactly is the constitution? So in this lecture, we will focus on what is a constitution, what are the various types of the constitution. For example, what is a written and unwritten constitution? What is an enacted and evolved constitution? What is a unitary and what is a federal constitution? Then we will focus on two other important concepts. The theory of separation of powers, which is attributed to French philosopher Montesquieu. We will also be looking at the doctrine of checks and balances. And towards the end, we will talk about another very important concept called constitutionalism. Let's get started and let me take you on a fascinating journey of the Constitution. So what is a constitution? We say constitution is a document of people's faith and aspirations. In modern Indian history lectures, you will know about, or you would have already watched these lectures, where you would be taught facts related to Regulating Act of 1773, Pitt's India Act, the Charter Act, the Government of India Act, the Indian Councils Act. And there you will also be told that the year was 1946, when cabinet mission was sent to India. What this cabinet mission did? This cabinet mission promised the people of this country a constituent assembly. What is a constituent assembly? A group of individuals coming together to draft and write the Constitution of India. So the year was 1946, when cabinet mission was sent to India. And this cabinet mission promised a constituent assembly for the people of this country. The British government said that now you can write your own constitution. You can draft your own constitution. You can frame your own constitution. So Indians got together, were part of this body called Constituent Assembly. And it is this Constituent Assembly which gave the people of this country their constitution. And this Constituent Assembly met for the first time on 9th of December, 1946, which is also my birth date, 9th of December. But that's not important. This Constituent Assembly was set up to write and draft the Constitution of India. But before that, who was making law for the people of this country? We were ruled by an alien government. We were ruled by a foreign power. The supreme authority was the Queen of England. So the British Parliament was making laws for the people of this country. The Government of India Act of 1858 was passed by the British Parliament. So British Parliament, an alien parliament, a foreign power, was making laws for the people of this country. British thought that this is our white man's burden. It's the burden on these white people to civilize the uncivilized people. That's what they called white man's burden. It was argued that British, since they are of a superior race, and it is a burden on them to civilize the uncivilized population of the world. For example, in Asia, in Africa, it is their white man's burden to civilize the uncivilized people of Asia and Africa. So we were not considered worthy enough to pass the laws for ourselves. We were asking for liberty, equality, justice, not given to us. In fact, there was a time when an Indian judge could not try a European. If there is a European who is accused of committing a crime, whether this European is guilty or innocent will be decided only by a white judge, will be decided by a European judge. An Indian judge cannot decide whether a European is guilty or innocent. That means there was no equality. We were not having freedom of speech and expression. We were not given dignity. But then we wrote our own constitution. From 1946 onwards till 1949, the members of the Constituent Assembly debated, involved in beautiful discussions to write and frame the Constitution of India. And when this Constitution was enacted, this Constitution gave us liberty, equality, fraternity, fundamental rights. So what is then this Constitution of India? This Constitution is a document of people's faith and aspirations. It was the aspiration of the people of this country that we be given liberty, equality, justice, fraternity, dignity. And this was possible only when this document was given. This document, this supreme document called the Constitution. So what is Constitution? Number one, it is a document of people's faith and aspirations. Constitution is something else as well. We will discuss that there are basically three organs of a state. One is legislature, the other is executive, the other is judiciary. Very briefly, the job of the legislature is to make laws. As the name suggests, legislature is a body which legislates, which makes laws. The job of the executive is to implement these laws passed by the legislature. The job of the judiciary is to punish people who have committed crimes. The job of the legislature is to make laws. The job of the executive is to implement the laws. And the job of the judiciary is also to check whether these laws are constitutional or unconstitutional, whether these laws are arbitrary or whether these laws are just. Where is it mentioned though? Where is it mentioned? That the role of the legislature is this, role of the executive is this, role of the judiciary is this. Where is it mentioned? This is mentioned in the Constitution. So Constitution, on one hand, is the document of people's faith and aspirations. And on the other hand, Constitution is a document which clearly allocates roles and responsibilities to different organs. Constitution tells us what is the role of legislature, what is the role of judiciary, what is the role of the executive. So what is a constitution? It is also a document which allocates roles and responsibilities to different organs of the state. But constitution is something else. Constitution is the supreme law of land, and this supreme law of land enjoys special legal sanctity. What does that mean? We have something called constitution, and we have something called an ordinary law passed by the legislature. Not all laws are mentioned in the constitution. There are some important aspects mentioned in the constitution, but then outside of the constitution, there are other laws passed by the parliament. For example, constitution talks about citizenship. But who becomes the citizen of India? Who should not be the citizen of India? What are the ways of acquiring citizenship? What are the ways of losing your citizenship? That is mentioned in an ordinary law passed by the parliament called the Citizenship Act of 1955. One more example. Constitution talks about that there should be prohibition on child labor. There should be prohibition on child labor because child labor is discriminatory. Child labor is exploitative. Child labor is exploitation. So there should be a ban on child labor. But who is a child? Somebody who is below the age of 14? What about those children who are in the age group of 14 to 18? Can they be allowed to work? That is something which is mentioned in the Child Labor Law, Child Labor Act. And this Child Labor Act, which was passed in the 1980s, it was amended in the year 2016. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that there is something called the supreme law of land, which is the constitution. And then there are other laws passed by the parliament, and these are what we call ordinary laws. Now, there's a question on your mind, which I can anticipate. Sir, why all laws are not mentioned in the constitution? I'll give you a simple analogy. For example, you have lots and lots of jewelry, necklace, earrings, hangings. You have dollars, you have gold bars, you have gold coins as well, right? Where do you keep necklace, earrings, hangings? Maybe in your wardrobe, because you have to go to a kitty party and you have to wear a necklace, you have to wear a stud, you have to wear a earring. But where do you keep the gold bars? Where do you keep the dollars? Where do you keep the gold coins? You keep it in the bank, the locker of the bank. Why? Because you don't need it quite often. You need necklace, you need hangings very frequently. So that is something that you keep in your wardrobe, at your house. But there are some things which you don't need, you keep it in the locker of the bank. In a similar fashion, just focus on the difficulty level. Difficulty level is, since I need necklace, since I need hangings very frequently, it should be easy for me to get access to necklace, earrings, and hangings. So you keep it in your wardrobe because you need to access them frequently. But you don't need the gold bars, the gold coins, or big necklaces very frequently. You keep it in the locker, and it becomes difficult for you to every time visit your bank, visit your locker, and then take these necklaces and gold coins. That is why constitution and the ordinary law can be easily repealed. Ordinary law can be easily amended. But the constitution is very difficult to amend. And we will discuss slightly later that to change an ordinary law, you just need simple majority. To change the constitution, you require special majority, a difficult majority. So there are some things which you want to keep permanently, which you want to keep for a long time. Such things you mention in the constitution. Fundamental rights, office of the prime minister, office of the president, office of the governor, elections, chief election commissioner, union public service commission, comptroller and the auditor general. These are the things that you need forever. These are the things that you need for perpetuity. These things you mention in the constitution. And it becomes difficult to change it. Unless and until you have the special majority, you can't change anything that is mentioned in the constitution. But there are some things which you may want to change very frequently. For example, citizenship. For example, child labor law. For example, Aadhaar. For example, raising the minimum legal age of marriage for girls. These are the things that you need to change frequently. That is why you don't mention them in the constitution. You mention it in the ordinary law. And constitution is the supreme law of land. And this supreme law of land, it enjoys special legal sanctity. What does that mean? That means any ordinary law that parliament is passing cannot violate the constitution. All laws passed by the parliament should be in conformity, should be in agreement with the constitution. That means in the hierarchy of schemes, at the top of the hierarchy, we have the constitution. Just below the constitution, we have these ordinary laws passed by the parliament. Constitution is the supreme law of land. That means any law which is passed by the parliament shall have to be in agreement with the constitution. If any law violates the constitution, that law shall be declared null and void. How? I'll give you one example. The year was 2000. A law was passed called Information Technology Act. Information Technology Act was passed in the year 2000. The year was 2008 when this law, Information Technology Act, was amended. That means it was modified. When it was modified, Section 66 capital A was added to this Information Technology Act. What was the Section 66 capital A? If you use an electronic device, it can be smartphone, it can be laptop, it can be desktop. If you use an electronic device and through these electronic devices, you are transmitting messages and these messages cause annoyance to the public, you are committing a crime and you will be booked and you will be sent to jail. So what are you saying? The year was 2000, Information Technology Act was passed. The year was 2008. This Information Technology Act was amended, which means Section 66 capital A was added to Information Technology Act 2000. This Section 66 capital A said, whoever is using an electronic device, which can be smartphone, which can be laptop, which can be desktop, which can be palm top, whatever electronic device you're using, through this, if you are transmitting messages, it can be a WhatsApp message, it can be a Facebook post, it can be a Twitter tweet, it can be an Instagram post. And through these messages, if you cause annoyance to somebody, you are committing a crime, you will be sentenced to a jail term. Bala Sahab Thackeray, the head of the Shiv Sena, he died. He died a natural death. But then the members of the Shiv Sena, they called for a bandh in Maharashtra. They called for a bandh. There was one lady, Shaheen Darda. She wrote on her Facebook post and criticized, why is there a need to enforce a bandh when a political leader has died a natural death? One of her friends liked her status. It was a Facebook post. Her friend liked the status. Both were arrested. Why? Because they used an electronic device to transmit a message which caused annoyance to the members of the Shiv Sena. They were arrested and booked under Section 66 capital A. There was one more gentleman, a businessman from Puducherry. He used his Twitter account to tweet something against the son of the then finance minister, Mr. P. Chidambaram. Karti Chidambaram, the son of P. Chidambaram. This businessman from Puducherry, he tweeted that Karti Chidambaram holds wealth which is disproportionate. Disproportionate in the sense, if we look at his income or his known sources of income, what is the source of his income? He has amassed massive wealth. Where has he got this wealth from? This tweet caused annoyance to Karti Chidambaram, and this businessman was arrested under Section 66 capital A of Information Technology Act. One law student, Shreya Singhal, she approached the Supreme Court and she asked the Supreme Court, dear Supreme Court, do we have freedom of speech and expression? Said yes. Freedom of speech and expression is a fundamental right mentioned under Article 19(1)(a), which is mentioned in the Constitution. My lord, if I have the freedom of speech and expression, that means I can say whatever I have to say. I can express whatever I want to express. Don't you think this Section 66 capital A, it violates the fundamental right provided under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution? Shaheen Darda and her friend, this businessman from Puducherry, they have expressed themselves. Is it not violation of their freedom of speech and expression that they have been booked under Section 66 capital A? The year was 2015. Two judges of the Supreme Court were hearing this case. One was Justice Rohinton Falin Nariman. The other was Justice Chalameshwar. And both of them said, Section 66 capital A is unconstitutional, is null and void. Why? Because it violates freedom of speech and expression, which is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. So this Information Technology Act, it was an ordinary law passed by the Parliament. But an ordinary law cannot violate the Constitution. Constitution is supreme. Constitution is the supreme law of land. And this supreme law of land enjoys special legal sanctity, which means any law passed by the Parliament, if it violates Constitution, that law shall be declared null and void. And in this landmark case, Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2015, two judges of the Supreme Court said Section 66 capital A is unconstitutional, is declared null and void because it violates fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression, which is mentioned in the Constitution. What does that mean? That means Constitution number 1 is a document of people's faith and aspirations. Constitution number 2 decides, defines the roles, responsibilities of different organs of the state. What is the role of legislature? What is the role of executive? What is the role of judiciary? Where is it mentioned? Constitution. And Constitution is the supreme law of land, which enjoys special legal sanctity. That means at the top of the hierarchy, we have the Constitution. And no law passed by the Parliament can violate the Constitution. No order issued by the executive can violate the Constitution. Constitution is supreme. And if any law violates the Constitution, if any rule passed by the executive violates the Constitution, that law, that rule, that order shall be declared null and void by the judiciary. Which means Constitution. What does this Constitution basically do? If you look at the world, almost all the countries of the world have this supreme document called Constitution. The vast majority of these constitutions, what do they describe? They describe the basic principles of the state. Principles such as, something which we will discuss slightly later, that we are a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. So what are the principles on which we are founded, on which our nation is founded, our state is founded? These principles are mentioned where? In the Constitution. Not just that. The structures and processes of government. Are we a parliamentary form of democracy or a presidential form of democracy? Who has more power? The President of India or the Prime Minister? Who has more power? The governor of a state or the chief minister of a state? Where is it mentioned? In the Constitution. That means Constitution not only describes the basic principles of the state, Constitution also defines the structures and processes of the government, describes the fundamental rights of the citizens. What are the fundamental rights available to us? Right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to religious freedom, cultural rights, educational rights, right to constitutional remedies. What is this remedy? If your fundamental right is violated, directly approach the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is the protector of your fundamental rights. Supreme Court will protect and safeguard your fundamental rights, your individual liberties. Where is it mentioned? Constitution. And Constitution cannot be unilaterally changed, altered by an ordinary legislative act. Through an ordinary law, you cannot violate the Constitution. You cannot change the Constitution. Because if you have to change the Constitution, for that you need a special majority. And we will discuss slightly later what are these different types of majorities: simple, absolute, special, effective majorities. So this is what is a constitution. Constitution is a document of people's faith and aspirations. Constitution clearly defines the basic principles of the state, defines the structures and processes of the government, defines the fundamental rights available to the citizens. And all these things cannot be unilaterally changed by an ordinary legislative act. By simple majority, you can't change the Constitution because Constitution is supreme. And if you want to change the Constitution, get the special majority. This is what is a constitution.